How you going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode. I'm James. Jordie, my ineffable co-host, is joining me today. Now, it's been a pretty quiet week in the news, so we have both prepared a special report for you guys. We are going to be discussing the rise and fall of grain prices in Australia, how that affects our domestic consumption, and how it affects the international market. Because, Jordie, nothing else has been happening in the news this weekend, has it?
There hasn't been, James. Globally, nothing's been happening.
Globally, nothing's been happening.
This little thing happened on a national scale last night.
Did it?
Yeah.
I must have missed it. I was looking at grain yields.
The Australian federal election.
Snap, my friend. Yes.
It's okay. I forgive you. It's easily overlooked.
It is. As we know, Australia is often referenced in the international scene as a country where nothing happens.
Yes. Well, no, a lot did happen last night.
It did.
I don't want to kind of overblow this, but seriously, a lot happened.
It has.
A lot happened.
It's almost a historic election result, actually, from what we know so far.
Yeah, so Labor won the federal election last night here in Australia in a landslide. They have secured, as we speak, I believe 86 seats, on track to secure potentially 90. They need 76 to govern, so they're going to have a quite significant majority of seats.
Yep.
The coalition, however, have, as at this time of speaking, only secured 40 seats.
So a pretty big swing, isn't it?
This is the worst result for the coalition since the end of World War II.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Their primary vote is at an all-time historic low.
Oh, wow. That's quite interesting, actually.
So, look, I'd like to just go over some of the numbers, some things that happened. They were quite significant and I thought quite interesting as well. And then we can discuss, I guess, a little bit about the ramifications, the kind of policies that Labor are going to be hopefully pursuing.
Yep.
And then I guess some of the things which will remain the same and some of the issues that we have going into the future.
Absolutely. Yep, no worries.
So as I said, it was a Labor landslide. They won every federal seat in Tasmania, except for one held by an independent, Andrew Wilkie, which is quite significant. The whole of Tasmania now held by Labor.
Because again, they've been historically quite LNP focused, haven't they?
Yeah, I think it's been more evenly held. In South Australia here, every metropolitan seat is now held by Labor.
Which is very big news.
Correct?
Correct, yes.
The seat of Sturt
Yes.
has been a Liberal stronghold since the 1970s.
Yes, just for our audience, that's essentially probably the most affluent, I'd say, federal electorate in kind of the Adelaide metropolitan region. And yeah, like I said, it's been a Liberal stronghold, but obviously the tides have turned. And it was interesting while we're speaking of Sturt, because I wanted to touch on this yesterday morning while reading the Adelaide Advertiser. I saw there was a big double-page spread. One of the main stories was about how, now ex-Liberal MP, James Stephens, would be in danger of losing his seat. And obviously this was such big news that it warranted a double-page spread in the Advertiser.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember not all Jameses are made equal.
You should remember that, James.
Yep. Thank you. I will.
And let's address the elephant in the room. Peter Dutton lost his seat in Dixon.
He did, mate. He did. I was not expecting that result. So I think, let's be honest, I think our predictions, if we go back to last week and the last couple of weeks, I think we were both had a pretty similar prediction that it was going to be a Labor minority victory.
Yeah.
So they would still win, but they would not have won as many seats. And this completely flies in the face. This result we're seeing now completely flies in the face of that prediction. Yeah.
You know, as you said, so Peter Dutton has held his seat for the past 24 years. It's a pretty admirable length of time to hold a federal seat.
Good on him, man, honestly. You can like the man or not like him. I think we've made our views on him pretty clear, but that's a long career in politics.
It is, yeah. And nationally, the coalition lost 13 seats to the Labor Party, which is rather significant. We had previously speculated that there'd be kind of, I guess, more independents possibly taking them off the Liberal Party, maybe a few Greens. The Greens might gain some seats. That did not happen. It was a kind of a resolute victory for the Labor Party, quite nationally.
Why do you think that is, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, we
our premier election analyst, Jordie, over here.
We can talk about this. We can really get into the weeds of it. I think there was quite a few reasons why. A big swing against the coalition. I think people just didn't want to vote for Peter Dutton. When we went out and did our vlog, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to one woman, and she had said to me that she obviously didn't know a great deal about Australian politics. But
Most Australians don't.
But she just said that she didn't like Peter Dutton. And it does confirm, I guess, the speculation that a lot of Australians do see it as a personality contest between the two leaders. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Peter Dutton appealed to a lot of women, a lot of people maybe, say, under the age of 50.
I think young people definitely.
Or really, apart from rusted-on Liberal voters, I don't think people saw him as an inspiring figure and someone that just kind of represented, I guess, the more kind of casual, I guess, kind of warm Australian.
What we consider kind of upholds Australian values.
Yeah, as a kind of an Australian sort of larrikin personality.
Yeah, like a fair shake of the sauce bottle type character.
Almost like a Bob Hawke kind of character.
Yeah, of course.
That's what people do look for in a politician, and I do not think Peter Dutton captured that.
And that was one of our main criticisms going in as well, was just how, like, painfully uncharismatic that man was.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we actually, for example, overestimated the power of the kind of mainstream media bias in pushing the coalition agenda and promoting the coalition, because that's typically what they do in Australia more often than not.
Wait, James, you're telling me that the mainstream media is right-wing and reactionary?
I have a suspicion, Jordie. It's a theory that I've been working on, mate. I've had a suspicion for a while. But yeah, I think, and like you said, it does come down to, obviously the vibes.
Yeah.
And obviously he just couldn't capture that. But even then, he couldn't capture it in a way that even a person like Scott Morrison did.
No.
You know what I mean? Because even Scott Morrison, for all his weird kind of neuroses and idiosyncrasies, he somehow managed to, again, capture that vote. And obviously that indicates kind of a shift in the position of the electorate as well.
Yeah.
Completely. Obviously the things that people value are different. The issues that people are voting on were different. But even then, I do hold firm that you could have the exact same policies as the coalition had going in, which were not heaps creative or anything new and quite almost regressive in my opinion. But if you had a really charismatic leader, then they still probably would have been able to win. Because Anthony Albanese, he, in my opinion, comes across as a pretty kind of middle of the road, like probably a friendly man.
And that's worked to his advantage.
Especially against Dutton. But again, he's not like a super standout kind of bombastic figure.
Yeah.
I do say I think he is a good speaker.
Yeah.
But he's not on the level of like a Peter Malinauskas, for example, who we have in South Australia, who is a lot more charismatic,
for sure,
in the way he carries himself. That being said, I think Anthony Albanese is a very competent operator of the machine that he is at the helm at.
While we're discussing Dutton,
yes,
and obviously the fact he's lost his seat, the Liberal Party now does not have a leader, which in some ways is hilarious coming out of a federal election.
It
is. Don't have a leader. That's the first time that the opposition leader has lost his seat
in
a federal election.
So who can they pitch forwards?
Well, so there's, as you can imagine, not many. So you have Susan Ley, who is the deputy leader of the Liberal Party. She is, I would say, one of the running contenders alongside the shadow treasurer,
Angus Taylor. Yes, Angus Taylor does have a bit of baggage. There is a bit of controversy behind that man,
Quite a bit.
I have to say, yes. Yeah. Do you reckon I could run for the leader of the coalition? I'd have to run for just get a seat first, wouldn't I?
Yeah, you would have to.
Maybe infiltrated from the inside.
That could be a good idea.
Yeah, good left-wing tactic. Yeah.
So, yes, basically it'll be a run between Susan Ley and Angus Taylor. And then also you should throw in there Andrew Hastie, the Shadow Defence Minister.
Although Andrew Hastie is a bit younger, isn't he? I believe. And doesn't have that same kind of experience.
Yeah, that's right. While we're talking about Dutton losing his seat, I think we should talk about who he lost his seat to. Because, I don't know, have you heard of Ali France is the woman, the Labor candidate who upseated Dutton?
I've heard her in name alone. I could not tell you really anything more about her, apart from I have heard her name.
Yeah.
And I did hear predicted going into this that she was going to challenge Dutton for his seat, but it did seem likely, according to kind of most predictions, that he might maintain a slim majority of the votes.
So Ali France ran against...
Enlighten me and the audience,
She
please.
ran against Peter Dutton in the 2019 and 2022 federal election. Obviously lost both times. Went at it again for a third time, which is pretty incredible. She is a journalist by trade. She worked as a journalist during her early career. And she's also a para-athlete.
A para-athlete?
A para-athlete. So
Really?
in 2011, she was involved in a car accident where she had her leg crushed and they had to amputate her leg.
Really?
And then she ended up competing in the para-canoeing, winning 2 gold medals.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I really had no idea. Wow. All right, continue.
Yeah. It's quite an inspiring
That is
story.
very inspiring.
Her career is also laced with tragedy as well. She lost her ex-husband and her son to cancer. And this happened just after, I believe, she'd lost her leg. And she said what drove her to run in federal politics was her experience inside the health system and being disabled and having to seek out services for her disability, for losing her leg. So she said those interactions really, she saw firsthand how Australia's health system worked and she wanted to champion public health. So I have a quote from her which I thought was quite enlightening. She said, "Waiting for surgeries and appointments, I talked to many people about how they were struggling with health expenses and the pressure of the system. The whole experience drove a passion to see change in the way our healthcare system is funded. I am passionate about Medicare. After all, it literally saved my life."
Wow. There you go. That's quite powerful, actually. And again, going on vibes, again, purely going back to that kind of vibe analysis, that is someone you'd much rather have than the kind of robotic, stone-faced property tycoon Peter Dutton, who was opposing her.
She's a single mum. She has a mortgage, and as you said, she's not a real estate tycoon. I think she probably came across to a lot more people as
a human being.
As a human being.
As a human being.
And a working class Australian, potentially.
Yeah.
I was listening to her, there was an acceptance speech last night, listening to her, and I did have one problem. One major issue came up. Don't know if I can get past this.
Yes.
She's a Queenslander. And listening to her talk, you can hear that she is a Queenslander.
Oh, dude, well, look, that didn't work in Dutton. Sorry, guys, but no, that's fair enough. You can tell, can't you?
No, really incredible figure.
No, that is, yeah.
We'll have to follow her closely and see what happens.
I think so. I do find it's interesting that if she started off her career as a journalist, that would tend to indicate to me a level of media literacy and media cunning that maybe someone like Peter Dutton wouldn't have instinctively. Obviously, he'd have a whole team behind him, as she would as well, but knowing how to use that to her advantage, of course,
And what's funny is you've got to remember that Peter Dutton the entire time, through the campaign, was saying how they wanted to reach the outer suburbs and they didn't want to appeal to obviously like inner city lefties. What's funny is his seat is an outer suburban seat and he lost it.
That's hilarious.
It is quite funny. Wow, it really is.
Wow. Well, look, I mean, what can you say? I mean, like we said, he was in politics for 24 years. Yeah. Like you said, and I guess whether you like it or not, that's a lengthy career. So that is an achievement to hold on to it for that long. I don't agree with his kind of reactionary stance and the policies of the LNP. But
two things from the speeches I heard last night. Definitely the conceding speech by Peter Dutton. That was the most humility and the most humane I've ever seen that man ever.
I almost can't imagine him not like criticising something.
No, that's right.
Like, just not, you know, not being a regressive reactionary in a speech and criticising like a policy, actually saying something kind of productive and positive.
No, for sure. And I guess that's pretty. You would hope that you'd hope for that in politics.
Yes.
However, as America showed us, that's not what happens. But in his speech, he thanked Albanese. Said obviously his mum would be really proud what he's achieved, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And during Anthony Albanese's acceptance speech, there was some heckling from the crowd when he was talking about Peter Dutton.
Yeah.
And he actually shut them down and said, "No, that's not how we do politics here in Australia.
Yeah.
We respect our opponents. If they have differing views, we still treat them as though they're human, as though they're Australians."
Super wholesome on both parties. Like that is a super wholesome thing to see, I think.
And it really feeds back into the fact that Australia is not like the US, thank God.
Yes.
And I think this campaign showed it, that Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party really ran on a very divisive, reactionary campaign.
Yes.
And there wasn't a whole lot of positivity coming from them. There was no policies to look towards the future as to how they would make Australia a better place.
Yeah, well, I think that's something that we can talk about because, for example, when Donald Trump first got elected in 2016 in the United States, in that same year, you also had Brexit in the UK, and that is also where we saw the rise of these kind of more right-wing parties, particularly in Europe as well.
Yeah.
And obviously he created, in doing that, a new political current that tapped into for example, the failures of liberal centrism, which we'd kind of all, in the post-Cold War era, end of history, we've all been kind of conditioned to think, this is the best system in the world, but obviously it's not the best system imaginable, and lots of people did suffer, and I think obviously that was reflected in Trump, that was reflected in Brexit also.
The Reform Party in the UK.
Yes, and that also
Nigel Farage.
and that kind of fed into the Scott Morrison kind of campaign as well. I can see kind of a parallel current running there. However, I do find it interesting that the second time round, when he's been elected, obviously he's so tipped over the table of the international system that we've seen it really backfire. So I'd argue, and we'll talk about this a bit more in a second in relation to Canada, but I'd argue him getting re-elected, instead of strengthening that kind of far-right reactionary side of politics, he actually completely scuttled it.
Yeah, no, you're right. As you said, in Canada, their most recent election last week definitely became a referendum on Trump. The Liberal centre-left party, which is similar to the Labor Party here in Australia, they ended up winning with a swing towards them at the end there. Because, as you said, most people in Canada did not look to Trump and see that as inspiring. They didn't want that type of politics in their country. I think there is definitely a similarity here in Australia. A lot of Australians, let's call it for what it is, let's not sugarcoat it, Trump's domestic policy has been incredibly authoritarian.
Yes.
Incredibly. And I don't use that word lightly. I don't like throwing those words around that having meaning. What he's doing in his America is incredibly authoritarian.
Yes, and I think it's also with the certain level of a certain unapologeticness to it, that even, for example, like the Dems under Biden Obama, they were still locking up, illegal immigrants in cages on the US-Mexico border, but they didn't brag about it.
They didn't brag about it.
Whereas Trump's going around bragging about it now. And I think you can see that in Canada, for example, where after the dictatorship of Commandante Trudeau, who was in power for, off the top of my head, couldn't tell you, but like at least two terms. And he was so unpopular because obviously he didn't resonate with the Canadian electorate anymore. He's also just a wet sack of a man. I don't think very inspiring. But the gentleman challenging him, Pierre Poilievre, I believe his name is. Excuse my French, pun intended. He was projected to win. Like, everyone's like, there's no way that the Liberals in Canada could win again. So obviously, Trudeau stepped down. Mark Carney stepped in. And then when Trump got elected, and especially started kind of acting aggressively towards Canada with the tariffs and talking about annexing Canada, et cetera, that just completely shifted that pendulum back again.
No, for sure. And as you said, the similarities are here in Australia. We saw, especially Jacinta Price, the senator from the Northern Territory. She was unapologetic about just copying Trump's campaign, saying we need a Doge here. She was walking around. She had a Make Australia Great Again hat on. That it was just blatant. And she was interviewed last night on the television. I was watching it, and she said that it was the Labor Party's fault that the coalition had lost, that if you throw enough mud at something, eventually it'll stick, that the Labor Party ran on these really divisive politics. I was like, you just can't accept it. And the host...
Do you reckon she can see the irony in what she's saying?
I don't think she can.
I don't think she can.
The host, the ABC host started pressing her, though, and said, like, you ran on these Trump-style politics. And she goes, no, I didn't.
No, I
was
didn't.
Like, you were walking around with a Make Australia Great Again hat. Like, just own up to it. Die on your hill.
Die on you, exactly. And then talking about, like, the deceit and the lies inflicted upon you by the other people. It's like, oh, you were doing this. No, I wasn't. No.
All sides of politics do that, don't get me wrong. But just to be so blatant about it and then deny it, it's just, it was,
Oh, yeah, no, you're right. And I think as well, maybe we can look at the campaigns a little bit and how the outcome reflects that, because in terms of campaigning, it really wasn't that exciting on both.
Definitely not.
We've definitely had more exciting campaigns in the past where there's like more drama and things going on. But the lots of the kind of Liberal Party campaign promises, they kind of back themselves into a corner by trying to obviously match Labor's commitment to services,
Medicare spending,
public services, et cetera. Whether they would have upheld them or not, they traditionally have been the party to reduce public services. But apart from that, they didn't really come into the campaign with... Like, they didn't really campaign on any major kind of policy platforms apart from nuclear, which even you've had members of their own party come out and say, yeah, that's never going to happen, for example. Whereas Labor campaigned on the same stuff, strengthening public services, Medicare, debt relief, a somewhat coherent housing policy, et cetera.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there were slip-ups in the LNP campaign. You know, you had a few media incidents. You had Dutton kicking a footy at that camera guy and then just be kind of not really being very nice about it. But then you look at and obviously you have kind of the intrigues and some of the kind of the more dodgy money that goes into the actual members themselves, the opposition front benches themselves.
The thing that really stood out to me was just him just going back and forth. So obviously he said that he was going to make all public servants go back to work, not working at home. And then he flipped on that in the last week when he realised how unpopular it was because, lo and behold, a lot of single mothers and mothers work from home in the public sector.
Yes.
So...
And that wasn't a popular move.
No, definitely not.
But then again, you look at the, all credit to Labor, every single, a key figure in the Labor campaign was flawless, bulletproof. It was as if they all did a synchronized quadruple backflip and just landed at 10 out of 10.
No, for sure. They ran a very tight campaign. There wasn't any leaks. There was no controversy really as it went. And kind of, I guess, Albo, to his credit, just kind of kept the ship going on slow and steady through the campaign.
And nothing outrageous as well. Yeah. No massive sloganeering. No kind of nothing divisive. Just slow and steady. Inching forwards, as we kind of discussed in our last episode we did on this before the election, just that real kind of, not necessarily heaps exciting, but just working forwards.
Structurally significant and not exciting.
Yeah, not exciting,
whatsoever.
Which unfortunately, as exciting as we're trying to make it, that is what electoral politics is a lot of the time.
No, definitely, for sure. Just going back, I guess we should look at a few other little bits and pieces before we move on.
We've got a bit to talk about still.
The Greens got sort of not wiped out, so they retained their sort of 12% vote. I think it went up by 0.9%, so they're almost at 13%. However, they did lose the seat of, it was Brisbane and, sorry, I can't remember the other seat off the top of my head. So it was the seat of Brisbane held by Max Chandler Mather that they lost.
That's a win for humanity right there, I think. Sorry, Max.
So, they lost that seat. And Adam Bant, last time I checked, was just holding on to his seat in Melbourne.
Just edging his seat. Yeah.
So they're going to probably end up with 2 seats, I believe. And then the Climate 100-backed independent Tills managed to hold on to all their seats. Mm-hmm. And then there was another one that won a seat in the ACT. So I think they're up to about 11 or something.
Obviously, the full count hasn't... it's still underway at the moment. Yeah. So we'll wait probably till tomorrow or something when they've actually finalised all the numbers.
I guess there was a lot of analysis, including my own, that sort of probably expected the minority parties to do a little bit better. One Nation didn't win any extra seats.
Not surprised.
Trumpet of Parrots did not win a single seat. They got 3% of the vote.
Also not surprised.
Not surprised at all. And the Greens sort of stayed stagnant but managed to lose their seats because there was a big swing towards Labor. I think.
Continue, sorry.
A lot of people at the last minute decided to probably give their preference to the Labor Party in the House of Representatives, realising that, hang on a second, we don't want Peter Dutton to be our Prime Minister.
Well, and especially after the last election when the Greens have been, the last, 2 elections, when the Greens have slowly been building up.
The last election was a green slide, according to
Yeah, exactly, And then so it's so funny to see how they've essentially failed. All that momentum has kind of been stopped, essentially. And obviously, I like rhetorically, I like a lot of the stuff that the Greens say, but their function in the parliamentary system, I think a lot of people of all walks of life are kind of seeing that isn't necessarily productive for the greater good of the nation, of course. Look, because they have been quite obstructionist in lots of their decisions.
No, for sure, that's right.
But that being said, I do obviously care about, for me, environmental policy and lots of the things that they champion, rhetorically at least, are very, very, very important.
On that note, so Labor have a strong mandate in the lower house. Mm-hmm. There's no reason for them not to go ahead and legislate on a lot of the policy platforms that they put forwards. We will be covering that pretty closely. I really hope they do. There's some great policies there. However, it'll be also up to what happens in the Senate because they don't have a majority. In fact, what has happened in the Senate
I'm not going to lie, man. I see the Senate as just like akin to the Roman Senate.
It's very
like
similar.
a bunch of kind of like wine drunk, wealthy oligarchs just essentially playing with the functions of the state, shall we say.
Yeah, but
maybe that's not an accurate portrayal.
So if a lot of this legislation does get held up in the Senate, it'll be very difficult for them to pass it. I did read this morning that if Labor and Greens combined hold the minimum 38 seats after this election, Labor will only need one more vote to pass legislation supported by the Greens but opposed by right-wing parties. So we also have Independent David Pocock he's been re-elected. The former Greens leader Lydia Thorpe and former Green Lydia Thorpe and the former Labor Senator Fatima Payman, who defected, are all options that Labor will have to seek to pass in the Senate.
Yes.
Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens, notably, was re-elected in South Australia. And we cannot forget, you know what, James, I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
What really mattered to me last night, my favourite politician got re-elected.
Bob Katter.
Bob
Katter, the man himself, dude. Say what you will about Bob Katter, that man is infallible.
Say what you want about Australian politics. It can be very dry and boring. I find it interesting. Bob Katter makes Australian politics incredibly fascinating.
He's arguably
hilarious.
The most interesting man.
Definitely.
In Australian politics, 100%. Like, I think lots of his...
and he'll be in the House of Reps. It was so good.
And look, he obviously has some kind of reactionary positions. He does have some strangely progressive positions as well. But yeah, he is, deny it, you can like it or not, he is, I think, one of the most community-focused and, like, people who's always out there, always talking to people, always working in the community, and that is why he retains the seat, because he puts in the hard yakka.
James, he is the only politician in Australia at a federal level talking about the need for the Australian government to play a role in the economy. He often talks about the need for the nationalisation of Qantas and the nationalisation of our mining sector.
Which, again,
you will not see that from any other party. The Greens rarely talk about this. I've never heard anything from them about that. Katter gets up 10 out of 10 times and talks about this.
And just rips him.
He really does.
And dude, that is honestly possibly the most based position in Parliament. That is something I completely agree with.
And as we recently found out, his son holds the state seat in his electorate up in northern Queensland.
Not the same amount of charisma as his father, but he's doing well.
What I found fascinating was a self-identified agrarian socialist.
Yes.
Which obviously, I guess their kind of argument is that the state needs to play more of a role in primary industry and primary production and in agrarian production and making sure that Australia secures its own food security and mineral security, which I think are great things.
Oh, great things, exactly. And obviously, I think that comes down to as well, and this reflects the main flaw in the National Party itself, is as they've always portrayed themselves as being the party for like the farmers, the struggling farmers. Yeah. It's like, no, they actually represent the huge agribusinesses that have monopolised farming industry, destroy small farmers, and also destroy the environment with their unsustainable practices,
very well put,
etc., etc.
For sure. No, you are completely right, James. Yeah. Bob Katter does stand up for what I think are some very significant things that both parties failed to address.
Yeah. And long live Chairman Bob, as far as I'm concerned. I want that man to be 106 years old, still in Parliament.
And then eventually entombed into a mausoleum in the capital city.
Yes, and then we can go on essentially like a little pilgrimage, and we can go and see his body.
Yeah,
and all cry at the death of our great leader.
Yeah. Look, James, we would like to get Robbie Barwick from the Australian Citizens Party on to discuss what he thinks is going to happen in the next couple of years under a Labor government. Yeah. He's very concerned about AUKUS. However, do you know what we should try and do?
Yes.
Talk to Bob Katter.
If I could speak to Bob Katter, I would die happy. You could kill me the next day. Bob Katter could kill me himself. I'd be happy to go, dude. Amazing.
So going forwards, I saw this morning, waking up on social media, a lot of very ill-informed commentary is what I would put it. Mm-hmm. A lot of people saying, it's going to be really hard under Albanese for the next 3 years.
Communists.
Inflation's going to go through the roof, cost of living, electricity. And I would just like to point out one thing, or a couple of things. Yeah. We're going to look at a couple of the policies, but neither parties, this should be understood, have any significant control really over the Australian economy. There are some policies that both parties can curate to push industry in a certain direction. There is tax policies, tax breaks, things like that. However, when it comes to interest rates and cash flow, that comes from the Federal Reserve, the Reserve Bank of Australia, and that is completely independent of either of the political parties.
Supposedly an apolitical organisation.
Party. However, would you also, for example, debt and inflation, both parties kind of try to keep both those levels inside a certain area. So there's not a great deal that either party can do inside a capitalist economy. They are quite restricted. Should we point out that both these parties support our current economic system? They're not going to drastically change it. No. The reason I say this is when we look at, for example, the price of housing, which the market's completely privatised. When you look at the banking sector, which is completely privatised, they are completely out of the reach of any policies from either of the major parties.
And whether we like it or not, that is the way it is.
Our electricity, our energy sector, we have spoken about this, the way it is cut up into a pie and privatised, and the profit maximisation, the profiteering that's extracted at every single point of the energy system. Neither of the parties and Labor can do anything about that, whether they like it or not. They are not going to go out and start nationalising sectors of that industry.
Unfortunately.
So what that means is, while people would like to complain about electricity prices, which we have here on the podcast before, there is not much that the Labor Party can legislate over the next 3 years to significantly address that.
No. There are things they can do.
There are things they can do.
There are things they can do to make your life better.
Yes.
Or your life worse.
Yeah. And we would like to talk about a few of those policies now, and we would like to follow them and make sure they actually legislate them. Because you spoke about this earlier, is that what might also happen is that with this massive mandate, Labor might decide to kind of slow down and see they don't have to actually radically change anything.
Because they have the popular vote. And this is something that I'm always scared of in your kind of two-party electoral systems.
Yeah.
I think this is something that is really being exemplified in the United Kingdom, for example, where the Labor Party and the Conservative Party are almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
I'd say in the United States, we have the Democratic Party and the Republican Party almost exactly the same. I'd say Canada's probably a little bit closer to us, but there is still less daylight between the two parties. And that's one thing I always appreciate about Australia is that our Labor Party is that they still operate in the same system.
Yeah.
However, there is a bit more daylight between the two.
Yeah, for sure. You're right.
And that's one thing that if they do not use this mandate for what they have promised, then that would be very damaging to Australia, in my opinion, in the long term.
Yeah.
Because when you get a huge swing like that and you have the public confidence, the public vote, you can just ride on that and just regress.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's nothing stopping you because you have that much of a mandate. Whereas when it's close, you really have to push. You really have to push the boundaries and you really have to kind of fight and innovate policy-wise to make yourself stand out and to gain that lead. That's the only thing I am worried about.
Yeah.
I do think, however, though, that with that big, with the amount of seats they have, they will be able to get pretty much what they want through Parliament.
Yeah.
It will just be making sure they do, essentially.
And I would say that one of the most significant ones, and this affects everyone, is Medicare, it's public healthcare here in Australia. And what the Labor Party are going to do going forwards is that they're going to deliver more bulk billing for all Australians. I think they want to make every 8 and 10 visits completely covered by the by Medicare, so you won't have out-of-pocket costs. They want to open more Medicare clinics so that there's more for people to go get. They want to also deliver more doctors and nurses and invest almost $1 billion into women's health and open more endometriosis and pelvic pain clinics.
Yes. Just need to say this for the seppos out there, the Americans out there. This is a completely foreign concept, but the idea that you can go to the doctor and you don't have to pay for it. So you go to a doctor, say you need a prescription, you need some antibiotics, you have a cold, or you have like a, maybe you're an older person and you have like, some kind of some chronic kind of health issues. You don't have to pay for them.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, and
in my opinion, that's a basic human right.
Definitely.
And that's, again, one of their main platforms. That's one of the main things they've championed as well.
And they're going to further subsidise mental health, especially for Australian parents, because they've noted, obviously, the stress on parents and think that mental health should be subsidised somewhat for that. And also, notably, backing men's health, delivering another $11.5 million to provide men's healthcare training to primary healthcare workers and develop a campaign to encourage men to visit the doctor and discuss issues concerning men.
Well, that's very important because as being someone that works in construction, you often have the old I just cut my finger off on an angle grinder. I'll just wrap it in duct tape. Should be right, And that is probably not good overall for public health. So
No,
it's important
not.
again, for men and women, of course, but I think it's especially a phenomenon that exists in men where you do I'll be right, and then you just die.
Yeah. And another one of the policies, and we've heard other people talk about this quite a bit, and that is the Future Made in Australia policy, which I don't understand why the Labor government didn't run on this. They didn't campaign more on it.
I don't think anyone understands the intricacies of it.
No, I barely understand it. I've just read into it a little bit. But I would argue that 99.9% of people in Australia have no idea what this is. And this basically is a policy where the Labor Party has realised that they can't do a great deal about extracting wealth from our minerals here. The mining sector has a massive monopoly. They
hold a lot of power.
Huge power here in Australia.
We've seen what happens when you go against the mining monopoly.
Correct.
Yes.
We can look at Kevin Rudd being ousted for his super profits tax that he tried to put in. They can remove governments here in Australia and prime ministers. It's happened. It can happen again.
And they're also majority owned by foreign companies as well.
Foreign investors.
There might be a little bit more motivation to act in the interest of Australia if they were all majority
So
owned
what the
by
Future Made in Australia policy is trying to do is trying to create a manufacturing sector here in Australia. They're going to subsidise carbon neutral manufacturing and use the resources we have in Australia. They're going to allow the mining companies to still extract them, but sell them to a manufacturing industry here in Australia that can use those resources, keep them here, and then manufacture components that will then go into more advanced manufacturing. For example, in China and stuff like that. So they'll be looking at manufacturing battery components, solar panel components, parts that go into EVs, etc., etc.
So essentially stepping us up the value chain and adding, and instead of just extracting raw materials and buying them back,
value-added components that will go into manufacturing.
Fantastic, that's great.
As someone that thinks Australia should invest more into a manufacturing sector, or at least develop it, make it more complex, that is a great policy.
And I guess that's the kind of thing that if you can do it correctly, it can't really be dismantled because the forces of the market take over. Once it gets to a certain size and, like I say, shall we say, a certain value and a certain density, the forces in the market, it gains its own momentum.
Yeah, definitely.
Shall we say? So it's not something you can undo once it's done without, if you were for some reason a coalition government that got into power in 3 terms' time and you wanted to really cripple the Australian worker. You couldn't just, what are you going to do? You're going to literally send in the death squads to shut down factories? Probably not.
And the other thing about this is that these sectors, these manufacturing sectors, are heavily unionised. So it'll also generate a unionised workforce, which is great for the working class. They're going to receive good wages from doing these jobs as well. And that's...
And you also have all the services for those industries as well.
Yeah.
So it is actually ambitious, and I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And I think, and then in turn, you have more, for example, the education component, so you have more skilled workers, more people learning about these new skills, innovating. So I think that's all levels of industry. That is a very healthy thing to do.
While we're talking about education, their education policies they've announced will be to cut student debt by 20%. This is great for all young people.
I think this is a win for both of us.
The amount of student debt has been increasing exponentially here in Australia. Massive hexes of over $100,000. They are looking to not wipe out the debts. People will still pay back the debts, but they will be wiping out the interest and the inflation that's incurring on those debts.
Yes, when they index you're debtful for inflation.
Correct.
Which is essentially works like an interest rate functionally. Then, But again, it's 20% off, which is good.
And that'll apply to all trade support loans. So any tradies out there listening, it's not just going to be your inner city lefty bloody arts degree uni students.
They're getting subsidised.
It's also the hard-working cobblers out there on construction sites.
That's it. But dude, that is that does make economic sense because the less money you're spending paying back your loan, the more money you can spend on goods and services, further stimulating,
of course,
the wider economy.
Yeah, it's a cost of living relief for young people, for young apprentices out there. tradies that have just gone into their first year of being qualified, uni students that have just gotten their degree and want to go out, this will make a difference.
Absolutely.
For sure.
That's cool. Yep.
Another part of that will be to make free TAFE permanent at a federal level, which is incredible. Invest $25 million to support 600 community schools and public schools in Australia, and another, I think it was 100,000 free TAFE positions as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, which is good. And do you know what? That ties back into what you're saying with the new potential manufacturing sector that we could have.
Yeah.
Then you can get the free vocational training to participate in those sectors as well.
Definitely.
With the free TAFE.
On the tax relief as well, and I think this is where Labor were actually able to outmaneuver the Liberal Party, is that they promised to legislate this year a $1,000 tax cut for everyone, which the Liberal Party rejected.
They did.
Which is hilarious because they're meant to be the party of, low tax,
I actually
small
had,
business.
while I was lining up to vote yesterday, I had the gentleman handing out the Liberal kind of how to vote cards.
Yeah.
And obviously you walk through, you kind of sunnies on, don't want to make eye contact with anyone. And you have, hey, go on, do you want to vote Greens, vote Labor? And they hand you out your cards. And I'm just kind of, no, all good. The guy comes up and he goes, Liberal Party. I was like, oh, good. He goes, yeah, get money back on your tax. And I was like, oh, all good. I wouldn't have got money back on my tax, actually. I don't earn enough. If I earned over $180,000 a year, I probably would.
And another thing that the Labor Party are offering to small businesses will be an extension of the $20,000 instant asset write-off for another 12 months.
Well, that's
which
good.
would be good for small business as well.
Yeah.
So, say what you want. We are in no way partisan or sectarian here at the Left Hook Media podcast. We mean that when we say it. But these policies, I think, overall are
good.
Are significant, great, and they address... They're for a lot of people in Australia.
Yeah, not just a specific kind of segment of the electoral base.
No, definitely
that
not.
Their allegiances are owed to. And that's the thing, I think, we are super critical of the Labor Party. We have been. Very critical of the LNP. Very critical of the Greens. The only character who escapes criticism is the great exalted Bob Catter. We'll go back to him, but that's all right. But at the end of the day, if our analysis, my analysis, Jordie's analysis, appears that it's going to be overall constructive for the nation, then that's good. I think...
Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, and I think the really important thing is this is a personal anecdote, is that you have to keep supporting public services, and lots of people, especially like tradies, working class people, kind of say, it's inefficient, government inefficiency, all right, not to mention how inefficient like corporate inefficiency is. And lots of people say, why are we giving money to, X amount of people in the public sector, NDIS, rah. And all I have always said and will always say is go to a country where you do not have strong public services and strong institutions and tell me you want to live there. Go to Peru, beautiful country, lovely people, but tell me that you'd rather live there than Australia.
Yeah.
When you see what happens when the government cannot look after its people in the way that people deserve.
That's right.
And that takes generations as well. You invest in it now. So if people are saying, you need to crack down on crime, it's you need to invest in these services now, so then in 10 years' time,
definitely,
it goes down. It's a generational thing, and these are slow, boring, incremental steps. Yeah. But the alternative to that is, just more police, more policing, more powers to these kind of forces. And it's like, but that snowballs. Yeah. And do you have an American example? Yeah. Where everyone just lives in destitute poverty.
Yeah, that's right. And your taxes is what you pay to live in a functioning society.
Mm-hmm. Your taxes
relatively like what we have in Australia.
Shouldn't be subsidising like the wealthiest 0.01%, essentially,
right.
Like what's happening in the United States, for example.
Things that will remain the same, things that we will criticise still going into the future will be the AUKUS agreement.
I think so.
Australia will continue to fund America's shipbuilding industry.
Yeah, military industrial complex.
Further military integration with the US, which personally scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah.
And we will continue to not tax our resource sector efficiently.
Yeah.
But however, hopefully the future made in Australia will address that.
You can add back some of that wealth that's being sucked away.
That's right.
I do think I know, for example, they have been working on legislation to start taxing more.
Yeah.
But still not to the level of like a Norway or Qatar or, these ones that all the think tankers always kind of come out with.
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure. All right. Well,
mate, it's been a big Big weekend.
Yeah.
All things considered. Again, I was really keen to get into grain supply and commodity pricing, but I think we've had some other slightly more important things underway.
Yeah.
Thank you for your breakdown, mate.
No, that's all right. Thanks for joining me. Your analysis was wonderful, as
Likewise.
always.
Yeah,
and
likewise.
we will see you next week.
See you later, guys. Take care.
Please like and subscribe.
Ciao.